So hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today as we celebrate Open Access Week with a chat about navigating the complexities of OA, putting the author experience first. That's in line with this year's theme of structural equity. I am Tony Alves, SVP of Product Management at HighWire, and I'm your moderator today. Before I allow our presenters to introduce themselves and their ideas, I want to share some housekeeping items and also set some expectations. First, this session is being recorded with the intention of sharing and will be made available following the session. We will be following up after this session via email to share a link to the video recording and a link to a survey because we value your feedback and we will use that feedback to optimize future webinars. And we will also keep you posted on additional upcoming events. So on behalf of everyone at HighWire, I want to thank you for coming. We're so glad you're here. Let's get started. I also want to thank our panel. Our panel includes Martin Jagerhorn, Head of Business Development at ChronosHub, and Shelley Allen, Head of Open Research at Emerald Publishing. The full session will be about an hour. With half or so dedicated to some presentation and the second to discussion among me and the panelists. At which time we can take questions from the audience. So please feel free to enter questions as you think of them in the Q&A box, and we'll do our best to fit them in as once we kick off the discussion portion of the program. So I'm going to start with just some introductory thoughts. Open access is a business model. It's really not a publishing model. There are no differences in how the research is peer reviewed or how the article is formatted or how the research is presented. However, a researcher and an author might be forgiven for thinking that dealing with open access requirements are part of the publishing process because of the undue burdens that are often placed on them. In preparation for our HighWire Best Practices webinar from August, it was on how life changed for researchers as a result of COVID-19. Researchers were interviewed about their opinions on a diverse range of topics. When asked about their feelings toward open access, there was general support for OA, but also a general annoyance with article processing charges and the complexity of the submission process. Most of the responses specific to APCs were that the researcher would only pay them if they were covered by their grant or their institution, or if their supervisor was adamant about publishing open access. Researchers care about their research and about getting published. And for open access publishing to be widely adopted, there needs to be fewer barriers. Today, we have multiple organizations creating multiple policies. We have governments taking an interest in how taxpayer money is spent. We have funders, institutions, and other organizations with different mandates as to where the research that they pay for gets published and how the research article gets distributed. Hurdles like fair data policies, well-meaning and essential for transparency in science, can complicate submission process. And requirements for the author to deposit their research article in a repository is also confusing. Their research for them, knowing which version, whether it's the author accepted version or the version of record, which repository it has to go to, what's the format. In many of these cases, there are conflicting policies and mandates, especially when the research is funded by multiple grants. So just think about this scenario. When the funder goes to submit their article to a journal, they're asked to identify all of their co-authors and provide all their co-authors' affiliations. Each author can have multiple affiliations, and often there are many authors. In addition, authors need to identify who funded their research. And sometimes different authors are working off multiple grants and from different funders with different mandates. And then authors are asked to provide an author order which indicate not just importance of each author, but also which author's institutions transformative agreement takes precedent, or read and publish takes precedent, or publish and read takes precedent, or which funder is the primary funder, or is there a waiver involved? But really, what is author order anyway? Different disciplines have different rules. Who is the most important author? The one listed first or the one listed last? In this scenario, I'm not asking you to think about the data entry aspect. I'm asking you to think about the fact that each author could potentially represent multiple sets of compounding and or conflicting policies, mandates, revenue opportunities, or exemptions. Now, I've only covered the submission aspect. I haven't mentioned all of the potential confusion faced by the author if asked about payment details, or asked what kind of OA they prefer, or what kind of license arrangement they want, or if they've conformed to fair data principles, or if they deposited the article in the right place at the right time. Researchers don't know whose rules to follow, and they can't be expected to find out. Remember, I said open access is a business model, not a publishing model. In the subscription world, we don't expect authors to identify potential subscribers, or price the article, or provide a profit and loss statement, or draw up a license agreement. That is the job of the publishers. So for the rest of the hour, let's explore these challenges and talk about solutions. We know that there are several initiatives underway to help sort out the payments, each coming at the problem from a different angle. The OA Switchboard, affiliated with OASPA, is a centralized information exchange hub that lets authors and journals know what rules are in place to pay for open access based on authors' affiliations and funders. ChronosHub provides similar service, but goes beyond just payment matching. Along with Copyright Clearance Center and Aptera, these are automated payment processing systems. And interestingly, all of these can work together as well as separately, but all are reliant on standardized data. So part of the solution is greater standardization of data needed to understand who funded the research. Where was the research conducted? What authors received funding? What countries are involved? So persistent identifiers like ROAR, ISNIs, and ORCID help this, but there also needs to be consistency in how data is formatted and how it's delivered. Consistent schemas and consistent transfer protocols. Let's let the machines do the work. Now, in many ways, that's almost the easy part. The hard part is sorting out the myriad of rules and regulations established by funding bodies and research institutions and governments. The US National Institutes of Health has rules. There are evolving requirements out of Europe through Coalition S. We can see how China, looking at how much they spend in open access fees and reevaluating the value proposition of what they see as underwriting Western research. All kinds of rules and regulations are popping up. And then there are requirements from philanthropic organizations like Wellcome Trust, the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, and the Gates Foundation. So let's move on to our panel. First up is Martin Jagerhorn, head of business development at Chronos. He'll be followed by Shelley Allen, head of open research at Emerald Publishing. So I will turn it over to you, Martin.
Thank you very much, Tony. And hello to everyone, also from my side. It's a pleasure to see you here on sort of Halloween times. So we should maybe have a Halloween theme here. But we'll try to stay with open access. And let's see that I can just share my screen here as well.
Yep, you've got it.
Right, great. So yeah, this is one of my favorite topics, how to navigate the complexities of open access. As Tony said, am head of business development at ChronosHub. So I work a lot and closely with institutions, funders, and publishers, and also individual authors, to really try to see how we can find good solutions to our common challenges in the research ecosystem. So today I will primarily focus on some, or highlight some ideas of what we have found in these collaborations in terms of best practice and possible ways on how to better navigate the complexities of open access together. So if we just start the very beginning, and very much in line with what Tony expressed earlier. I mean, open access is, as we know, great for many different reasons, to make it, of course, available to a bigger global audience, and we have better return on tax money and so forth, right? But in this context, from our point of view, the funders play an important role. I think many of you have probably seen this illustration before many times. And of course, we can say open access is good to be compliant with these grant rules, but from our perspective, it really goes in the other direction. Funders do issue these policies and develop and continuously sort of evolve these policies to drive open access in various ways, as we all know. So if we look at the funders and their policies, that is, of course, driving open access, and that's great, but it also leads to a lot of different complexities. First of all, if we want to talk about the authors as our favorite subjects, it becomes really, really complicated for them. Right? It is almost impossible today for authors to know where they can publish their work and in what path they need to take when they publish their work with a certain publisher or journal in order to stay compliant with these policies. Exactly as Tony said, we have plenty of funders with plenty of different policies, and even within Coalition S, the policies are not identical. Right? Some apply the Plan S policy on articles from the 1st of January this year, other on articles from grants awarded after 1st of January this year. And so we're having to deal with multiple policies for each individual funder already, right? And the authors are, of course, also not very familiar with the vocabulary of open access. What does it really mean with these different license types or open access types, by the way? And that's not helped by the fact that publishers are not really agreeing on a standardized wording, where gold open access sometimes mean a gold open access journal, and others it's a paid way in a hybrid journal. So we have all kinds of obfuscation a little bit, making it really, really tricky to navigate through this current situation. And funders, by having these policies, also drive publishers to develop new business models. So I know Tony said open access is a business model, but open access is, I think, about 28 different business models. When we talk about different kinds of measures, whether that is a read and publish agreement, gold and hybrid, of course, subscribe to open and diamond, we have all kinds of business models, and this will probably just continue to increase, making the transparency even, the system even less transparent. And so by having different business models makes it really tricky for universities or other research institutions to deal with all their agreements. How can you monitor agreement in an efficient way? Right now, well, they have to go into a lot of publishers' open access dashboards, which means that everything is quite fragmented, right? Very manual, because you have to log in separate systems, do checks manually, and then reuse the data in various ways manually. So in this kind of context, from, again, our point of view, the worst situation is really for the authors. Because they run these compliance risks. There are funders like the European Commission, for example, that does issue penalties to institutions because there are non-compliant published results out of their funded grants. Then authors have to report back, again manually, to the funders on the outputs of their grants. And then authors also are asked to put data into different kinds of repositories or CRIS systems or research management systems locally at the universities. So in summary, we have a lot of stakeholders with a lot of systems, but they're still very, very much in silos. We have a lot of manual and duplicated work, said re-entering the same data over and over again. And as it's fragmented, it's almost impossible to do sensible analyses. And we spend a lot of a lot of time to collect data and make it available in these different places. So it's very high cost for everyone involved. So with that sort of dystopian starting point of where we are, we of course also try to learn and see how can we get around these problems. So navigating these complexities does not have a silver bullet. But we do believe that there are a lot of experience out there that shows bits and pieces of best practice. This is a broad field, right? So it's not one single entity having best practice on all different areas, whether that is how to deal with gold and green and hybrid, etc., different kinds of open access management. But at least there is some kind of best practice for each area. And one part of that best practice is seemingly, from our point of view again, whether this is an institution or a funder or a publisher, it doesn't matter. If they put the author experience first, well, then they generally actually also succeed in one way or the other to solve these complexities. But a big challenge is to change. We are in an industry which is, every organization is very having a lot of inertia for change, but I think in our industry, working in this domain for the last 20 years or so, is extremely difficult to change. Changing processes, changing behavior. So we do need to have a lot of courage in all these organizations to do the move and change and move out from our comfort zone and the status quo. And one area that, if we now look at institutions of best practice, is the centralization of open access funds. So this is something that we've seen many institutions simply try to ignore as a challenge or a problem. They say, yes, an excuse, well, we're extremely decentralized. We cannot centralize our open access fund. So they let their authors pay for APCs. We have the APCs in the wild. We have no control over the data, and we cannot do anything about it. These costs will just continue to increase. Whereas the bold ones that do centralize their open access fund, well, they know that they're paying a lot, but at least they can start doing something about it. Because if you centralize your open access fund, well, then you also get a central place for your data where you start to have a possibility to make sensible analytics, or you can start to automate things. And this is where collaboration is extremely crucial. And there is a lot of collaboration already. The question is just how can we help each other to break down these barriers? And this is on the one hand side across organizations, but also across sort of the internal organizational barriers or boundaries. If we look at institutions, we have libraries, we have research offices around the world at almost every single university, but it's not at every single university they actually collaborate. And that's a necessity in this case, where we do have funders and their mandates impacting the research office and funding and grant funding for the organization. We have libraries that have the overall responsibility for helping their authors through the publication or publishing process. Paying for APCs is a little bit in between. So we do see interesting examples of universities that actually have dedicated units that report both to library and research office. So one way of maybe facilitating, collaboration internally. But of course, a lot with third parties, if we may say so, different kinds of infrastructure providers like HighWire, but there are also, of course, other submission systems out there. The OS Switchboard as a community initiative, fantastic, to help us get together and try to drive things forward. But there are plenty of other systems and initiatives like institution repositories, CRIS systems, the journal checker tool, and so forth. And that's where we believe that we have a big task of standardization. This is where we really need to agree on different data standards and formats, but it's also a lot about standardization of processes and already just definitions of words. The terminology that we have in open access is, for most people outside of our industry, but also for a lot of people in our industry, and not the least for the researchers, a jungle. And no one probably knows exactly what every specific term really means. And there are new ones coming up all the time. So this kind of standardization, we believe, is really key to get things forward. And try to balance that with the kind of flexibility that we know that we need. There is not one model fits all. And that's also why there are different flavors of open access and systems and what they do and what they focus on. And the key around standardization to get this to be automated, and this is sort of what we're looking for eventually, to unburden the researchers, but of course also unburden administrators at institutions and publishers, funders. A really important key to automation is the standardization of what kind of identifiers that we use. And first of all, that we do start to use persistent identifiers, and not just the organizational identifiers. We have identifiers for all entities in the research ecosystem. We just need to ensure that we start using them. And so in this context, I wanted to highlight really the concept of FAIR, so making data findable, accessible, identifiable, and reusable, and trying to do that upon inception. Because this, in terms of standardization, where we have thousands of publishers, is of course quite tricky. How can we get thousands of publishers to suddenly follow the FAIR principles and suddenly have PIDs, or persistent global unique identifiers, for all the different entities? So the question is, can we find ways to shortcut the system and get a little bit faster forward, seen to getting information structured and following the FAIR principles? So in that context, I wanted to highlight an initiative that we have as a collaboration between a number of partners, so very collaborative. It includes ChronosHub, of course, but also driven by DataCite. It includes Dryad as a repository, Cedar for specific templates to ensure data becomes fair, Crossref, but of course also publishers and specifically submission systems, and the funders. So you can read more about that. So there is just a first very simple website with an overview for the moment. But this is a 3-year collaboration to try to get a little bit this kind of shortcut. So I'll explain a little bit what the flow looks like here, just to give you an idea. So grantees, when they submit grant applications to funders, they will increasingly be asked to provide data management plans. Funders issue these grants, and they approve the data management plans. All right, so typically when we at ChronosHub work with funders, well, we automatically get the grant data into ChronosHub already. But what we'll do as part of this collaboration is to start to issue Crossref DOIs for the grants and DataCite DOIs for the data management plans. So we get at least a little bit more unique identifiers and help us to connect the dots in the research ecosystem. In ChronosHub, grantees can already get guidance into journals. So there's a journal finder. They can see for each journal what the compliant path looks like for each individual journal, seen to their funder's policy. They can also see who should pay for this. It also includes agreements that institutions have with publishers, so they can see if there's an APC discount or read and publish agreement, etc. So they know who will pay for this, if anything, the funder, the institution, or themselves. We also already have an integration with a lot of submission systems. So what we need to do here in addition is, in a way, just to send along these DOIs to the publishers. And in addition, we will look up and pull in any research data sets associated with this article from the grantee, and also send that to the publisher. So in this way, we can ensure that we get data fair upon inception, when it's created, in this case in ChronosHub, and we send it to the publisher. So we're no longer super dependent on the publishers or all publishers ensuring that the data becomes fair and that they include all these different identifiers. That's why it's also no panic if they cannot register the links between their articles and the DOIs for the grants. If they do, that's great and fantastic. If they don't, well, then ChronosHub can update those records from the other direction, associate the grant DOIs with the article DOIs upon acceptance. And this means that we have these different entities linked with each other. So the grants, the data management plans, the research data sets, the actual articles, but also the organizations where we use ROR IDs, but we also map ROR IDs with Ringgold IDs when we get data back from publishers. And in addition to that, enabling or facilitating for the grantees to actually also deposit their data sets if they don't have them when they submit their article. So they can also in ChronosHub then, or they will be able to upload their data set in the same way as they do with their manuscripts. And instead of sending them to the publisher, we're sending them in this case to Dryad. This can be other repositories as well, but that's what we'll focus on. Dryad works with DataSite to assign a DOI. The DOI gets back, and hence we have that link to the research data set. And this means that with this structured data in place here, we will populate an open accessible source for data and analytics that anyone can use. So any institution can tap in to that system. This will be a further extension of the PID graph that DataSite has developed through a number of, or a series of projects. And this means that institutions can start to reuse all this data and can do that in a completely automated way to populate their institutional repositories, as there are unique identifiers for all these different entities. And they don't need the manual validation of checking that this article is truly for this author because it was just made based on a name before, for example. Right. So this is, of course, a lot of work in progress, not all challenges solved, and rather call to action for everyone in the research ecosystem to hopefully go a little bit in this direction, where we cross paths in various ways. And this can be done in rather concrete ways. So every institution should develop a proper open access strategy so that they can manage open access and open science much more proactively than they do today. We believe that centralize the funding of APCs or publishing fees is a key component in that strategy. We also think that every institution can facilitate manuscript submissions for their researchers in many ways. And then unburdening the researchers because they have then the possibility to reuse this data upon acceptance to populate their local systems automatically. For publishers, our view is the most important is to put the author experience first. If we, or you as publishers, do that, well, then we automatically realize that we need to use these different identifiers, that we need to open up the data for initiatives like the OA Switchboard, ChronosHub, and others, so that we can get the data upon acceptance. Getting it once it's published is too late. Right? This is where we need the data. And for funders, it's still a mystery to me why there are so few funders that issue grant UIs today. The possibilities are there clearly, and it's not that difficult. We grant DUIs, we can solve a lot of challenges already. And funders should, of course, also then stand up to their policies and fund the APCs, is our view. And in their turn, also facilitate the manuscript submissions to automate the reporting for the grantees and not have to ask them to manually populate any system with outputs from the grants. So maybe a little bit provocative, but that's also the purpose here. So hopefully that gives everyone a little bit to think about what you can do at your own front. And with that said, thank you a lot for joining today's webinar. And I'm looking forward to diving into the discussion soon.
Thank you, Martin. Shelley,
Great.
shall we have you take the lead now?
I will share my screen. And you can see my first slide, hopefully.
Not yet.
Oh. You can't see my slide.
No.
Okay. Go back. Okay, screen. Share.
Oh, I think it's starting to work now.
Yay.
Yeah.
There we go. Can you see my first slide?
Yes.
Fantastic. Not with my notes and stuff, just the
Not, just like in practice.
just to check.
Yeah.
You never know. So yes, thank you again for the invitation to speak with you all today. My presentation is a little shorter than Martin's, but I think that's fine because there was so much to unpick in what he said. And what Martin is talking about is really sort of systems level and the complexity across the system. I think what I can add really is just a specific context, an example of a publisher trying to navigate this change and the opportunities and challenges within that. Definitely in the context of putting the author experience first, because like Martin, I completely agree that is where publishers should be focusing, and hopefully also institutions and funders as well. If we could keep that in mind and be talking to our researchers, I think we can slowly move the needle towards creating a system that's a little bit more supportive than it currently is. But first, in case you are not familiar with Emerald, we're a mid-sized publisher of the applied social sciences, and but we like to think we do punch well above our weight. Our mission is to support real impact through an equitable, sustainable community underpinned by healthy practices. And we're proud to boast diverse authorship with voices from both academia and practice, as well as a disproportionate amount of content from developing regions and in support of the SDGs compared to a lot of the larger publishers. What that actually means is that in a lot of instances, we are publishing unfunded authors. So it's quite notable that a lot of the discussion is around STEM and funded research, and I'm here to wave the flag for everybody else, basically. So this diversity of our portfolio means that we need to have a range of options to publish openly. And so we like to say that we're open to all and committed to being so. We're proud of our progressive zero embargo green open access policy, as well as our open research platform, Emerald Open Research, which is our collaboration with F1000, and our Platinum Open Access programme. We're also entering into transformative agreements with our customers that wish to do so. And colleagues at Emerald will always hear me talking about the opportunities within open research, because I truly believe that there are many. And it's an opportunity for us to reimagine not just our business models and workflows, but the impact research can have beyond academia. But realising those opportunities is complex. And so this snapshot shows the reality of Emerald's context. as a publisher, we want to harness the power of open to mobilize knowledge and create real world impact for our authors. But we don't want our authors to be disadvantaged as STEM subjects forge ahead. And the pace of change is very different within different countries. And within those within Europe, for example, even though they're very progressive for open, some countries would really prefer our green policy. Others want the version of record to be open. And the pace of change really is different globally. And within those countries, individual customers can want very different things. And you know, others still say they're not ready for open, and that still is quite a large chunk of the world. So we're managing several different business models at the same time right now, and I can absolutely echo what Martin was saying there. So streamlining what we can, where we can, is very important, because as we talk about the fact that publishing costs too much, that we want to transform this, we want to make this better value for the customer, for society. Where we're getting to at the moment is increased complexity, which increases costs. It's becoming a much more expensive system to support than subscriptions, for example. Not a vote for subscriptions, just showing that in the transformation, we're very far away from the nirvana of high output, low cost. And I think that's probably the same across all stakeholders at the moment. So in terms of the author experience, we usually talk about this the transition to open being the driver of author experience. And this is absolutely true, putting the author at the heart of the systems and the interfaces we create. What Martin was saying about the terminology we're using is 100% true, and we battle all the time how to distill very complex ideas and distinctions between different types of OA, between what they're funded or not funded to do. These things are really challenging. So we try to put the author at the centre of that, but and at Emerald, we're definitely transitioning from a product-based company to a service-based one, which again puts the author and customers at the heart of that. We're investing in our workflows, such as our partnership with ChronosHub to launch early next year, and that will manage the complexity of our deals and help support researchers as to how to comply with their funders if they do have funding, what open routes are available to them if they don't. But the complexity, I think, isn't just about open access as a driver. We have to also consider about our experience as consumers generally. So we're all used to seamless, near perfect customer experience in our personal lives through Amazon and Netflix, for example. These examples that are always trotted out by others. So can you just make it work like Amazon? You know, Amazon can do that really simply. How can we do similar? We're being judged by the standards, all of us. And we don't have the same deep pockets as those companies, not to mention that within this, customers are used to being able to personalize, for us to be as flexible as possible, which is difficult to scale and systematize without common standards. So I am going to echo Martin's point around standards. I think none of us have those deep pockets. We don't have billions to draw on in terms of creating the author experience. So I think our key here is common policies and common standards, which again we're very far away from, to really help ensure that the more familiarity people can get across our platforms, across our mechanisms, across the terminology we're using, the easier that author experience will be. So for us, the main watchword is absolutely co-creation and collaboration with our customers and with partnerships like the one we have with ChronosHub. And that's really to help us deliver the experience needed to support our authors, inform our customers, and manage huge complexity within our process and business models. And I mentioned that we're aiming to launch Emerald Submit, our partnership with ChronosHub, at the end of next year, at the beginning of next year. And just a sneak peek really of what this looks like. So we're looking for clean interfaces, for simplified information. You have to remember that there are huge barriers to a lot of researchers when you consider that their first language isn't open, that they are, you know, some of the top minds in the world, but that doesn't mean they have a deep knowledge of the publishing industry. And how can we simplify this, make this as easy for them as possible? So this is, you know, where we're trying to get to, what we're working on over the next couple of months to get that ready to launch. And you know, it's I'll stop sharing my screen now so we can move to discussion, but essentially just to show that we always talk about the ecosystem as it is, but the actual standards we're being held to are what we're all experiencing in our day-to-day lives anyway. And I think that's something that publishing and academia and the research ecosystem in general has been shielded from for a very long time. As Martin said, you know, the pace of change has been pretty much zero over a century, and then all of a sudden we're seeing a lot. So and the world and society is changing with that as well. So these are the kinds of things that we need to be thinking about as well. It's the author experience isn't just about open, it's also about what they're used to in their day-to-day.
Well, thank you, Shelley. Thank you for that. And so, you know, there are a couple of themes that I've heard here. And, you know, of course, the theme that we're focused on is making it easier for the author and to improving that author experience. And, you know, and it's not just about the data entry process or the giving the author better instruction. It really is, what is it that we can all do to make it better for the author as a community? And there are some great initiatives out there. You know, we talked about OA Switchboard, and of course we've been talking about ChronosHub, and then you know, fair data and the help that Crossref and DataCite provides. You know, there's all of these components are out there, and we look all the time at, you know, what are the persistent identifiers that are going to be able to best serve us. So, you know, there are sometimes competing persistent identifiers or competing initiatives. Right now, what do we, and I'll throw this open to either Martin or Shelley, as far as identifiers go, what might be missing in the mix right now? What might be lacking, or where might there be some improvement in the kind of data that could be transferred around to help smooth the process?
Well, that's a tricky one because
okay,
it obviously varies a lot. I mean, if we just take a very current challenge that we are facing, so we do work with a number of funders, and we do work with a number of institutions, and publishers, of course, as well. But where the publishers are not working with us in the same way as Emerald, we still need to collaborate. We still need the data upon acceptance. And this is what institutions that use other tools also will need, right? And so one tricky part is we will, in order to unburden the researchers, putting the author experience first, ideally they should not need to do anything. Right? They submit their manuscript, of course, but after that, they should not need to worry about compliance issues. They should not need to worry about payments or putting some data in for reporting back to the funder or the institution. And the key for that is, of course, the identifiers around first the organization, and not all submission systems, because that's where they go in. We will not ever see one single system, even if, you know, ChronosHub could do it. That will never happen, right? So we will still have always plenty of systems. So I think it's important that everyone that deals with any of these systems really puts this at the forefront to support all the different identifiers, right? And that's all identifiers seen to these entities, right? So organizational identifiers and personal identifiers and so forth. And what's missing the most, to come back to your question, Tony, are the identifiers for the funders. So very often the funder acknowledgement is a free text field, if anything. Otherwise, it's just in the AM. And this means, just a very, very concrete example, even if we get the invoice directly from the publisher, let's say for the Swiss National Science Foundation, if we don't have the funder acknowledgement clearly stated on the invoice, well, then we have to go back to the author and they have to do a screenshot of their article saying, that's the funder acknowledgement, it's here. We need some kind of tangible proof, right? And many publishers cannot send us the invoices because they cannot filter out on funder. So if we have funder IDs, or then that will solve a big part of this problem. And when we talk about then funder IDs, we have a plethora of different organizational identifiers. And that's where our view is, we support all of them because some systems use this and other systems use that. But if you don't have any, well, then the recommendation from our point of view is to focus on ROAR. ROAR is already taking over from GRID. And it covers many more organizations than, for example, the funder registry from Crossref, but they all contribute, of course, in this context, right? So one does not exclude the other. Clearly, we need to use all of them as long as they are in use in different systems.
I think from my point of view, obviously echoing everything Martin says, it's also about what we're asking the author for. I think we've had a tendency to just, whenever there's something we think will help, oh, now give us your ORCID ID, now give us, now we'll apply Ringgold, now we need your funder ID and your grant reference, and on top of that, you also need to upload your paper and provide the keywords and format it in the way we say you need to format it, and all these things, and I think we've kind of added and added and added without ever taking away. Do we actually need all of those things? I think the other side of it as well is just because, when we talk about these things, we tend to think about the context of the largest publishers who probably have the resources. It's very difficult for them to change an identifier or to look at how they're asking for data availability statements, for example. I think there's been some really good examples of collaboration. So STM had the Year of Data, and as a publisher that was really useful to us. We were able to talk to a number of other publishers who've been supporting data availability statements, for example, about best practice, and agree some common standards. But then the implementation of that is not seamless, is it? Because different publishers have different resources to be able to implement it, different roadmaps, so things will not happen at the same pace at the same time, and so really it's just pragmatism, I think, would win out for me. If you were to ask me sort of what's our biggest pain point that we would really love to get some kind of agreement on, it's not necessarily just IDs. Affiliations are really challenging. We do publish a lot of research that's outside of there's in practice, for example, so they don't tend to be covered by your Ringgolds and even your RAWs and things like that. So what do we do with those? And then just how we apply things like prepaid APCs, because some institutions want it to happen on where the research was conducted, which is fairly easy because that's in the paper, and others want to do it where the researcher is currently based. And these sort of, then they don't want the same things. And so these sorts of disparities of requests are very difficult to systematize. There's real risks of authors falling through the cracks between these sort of different policies, different ways of applying things, and that's on top of the fact that it's already difficult to robustly confidently say, yes, that author is definitely in this institution, even with all the different ways that we say we will try to do that. So for me, identifiers definitely help, but they need to also be backed up by robust policies in order to really help everybody, and not least the author. But I accept that that's actually those things evolve over time, and we're probably quite too early in this journey to have that. But if we've got that in mind, if we're looking at the common things that we're all seeing are problems, how can we work with our industry bodies, collaborate with organizations like ChronosHub and others, you know, and the peer review systems and all these types of things to actually start to solve them and agree common practices.
Yeah, the affiliation question certainly is complicated, and a researcher can have multiple affiliations, and there are multiple researchers with multiple affiliations, as I had mentioned earlier, and that kind of data collection is onerous and difficult but I certainly appreciate that. One of the missing voices today was from the library perspective, which we had hoped to include in our panel, and that's unfortunate. I'd like to just explore a little bit about what you've heard from libraries, because in preparation in talking with Micah, who had been planning to be here, he's there advising researchers as to what they should do, where they should submit, how they should go through the process. They're on the front lines. Shelley, do you have any advice to librarians, or maybe what are the things that you're hearing as to be the challenges coming from libraries?
Yeah, I think so. In the creation of Emerald Submit, for example, this is where co-creation is very important, and ensuring that you are including varied voices in your testing of a system, in your requirements gathering. So we've done a lot of that and got some good perspective on the challenges that librarians are facing there. And so, for example, we've done a lot in terms of terminology and workflow, but the thing that comes through loud and clear always is just make it clear they don't have to pay anything, because you can say you have a prepaid voucher, but unless you've got sort of £00, you do not have to pay. The signposting needs to be really very clear, otherwise even though they'll tell the author beforehand that they have a voucher, the system will tell them that they have a voucher and that it's been applied, but the author apparently will still go to the library and say, are you sure I'm not going to get an invoice? Are you sure that this is covered? And so I think people will become more familiar. I think it's also about terminology as well. So the things we're hearing, there's a lot of vernacular that just internal and just during negotiations and just among publishers, that how you describe the deals, how you talk about the word voucher, for example. So in Emerald, we use the word voucher. We all know what that means. Our customers have always seemed to understand what we mean by that, and we've learned our authors do not. They that really confuses them, that terminology. So we're now having to look at, okay, what's the best way to describe this, because we haven't quite understood that would confuse. And it's really about watching for these things, being open to them, and being willing to sort of adapt. So it's not, okay, how do we educate people about what a voucher means? It's what is the alternative? How are other people describing this that resonates, so that not being too precious about it being our way, if you see what I mean. So so I'd say those are the sort of the major things. The workflows are very important to libraries and to consortia. They are grappling with all the same things that we are. They probably they do have even less resources and a lot of, in terms of staffing and ability to administrate these deals. So there's common problems, so we can work towards common solutions, I think.
We have a related question that came in. It's on the chat line. What I did not hear much about today is about authors in APC waiver eligible countries or librarians, they're supporting authors, and the complexity of figuring out if a waiver is even there. So that's
yeah. I know Martin probably has something to say on this as well, but at Emerald, our practice is to apply them automatically, and we do that now. So as we get an author come through and they are eligible for one of those, we apply it automatically. So we don't charge for an APC, and we make that article open. What we're doing, what the beauty of automating this through systems like Emerald Submit is that then becomes even easier. So you can let them know at the point of submission that they will be eligible for that. You can make sure that, again, that is very clear as they're going through the process that yes, you will not be charged to make this openly available. And again, it's also about having other routes. So we do have a platinum route as well. So we have Emerald Publishing Services that is supported by organizations. We help them to professionalize their journal, and they support the cost of publishing, which means that we can make the version of record open with no APCs. So again, it's about having the different routes, not just APC waivers, but what are the other routes available to them that helps them reach their goal that, again, isn't going to charge them anything, and making that very clear what their options are. That's Emerald, though. Other publishers may do different things.
Yeah, but I can maybe comment that from sort of technical perspective, because this is a part that we developed with a lot, sort of very much together in the collaboration with Emerald and now also other publishers, how to manage the agreements, right? And there is no explicit agreement now necessarily between the publisher and given countries where there are sort of waivers. So if you come from a developing country, you may only pay 50% or nothing at all on the APC. But this is part of how we simply structure the data behind it. So when we work with publishers and we collect data on institutional agreements, it seems to not exist anywhere at any publisher. So we have simply developed an Excel template that is rather complex. And then we have built the data model in ChronosHub, so we can have this automation that Shelley mentioned. And that is essentially a decision tree with about 1,000 different points in that tree. So it is very, very complex because it needs to take a lot of things into consideration. The time period, it's not all journals, only some journals. And there are some different rules. Is read and publish, or is it a discount? How much is the discount? And in Emerald's case, it's also one layer in between because it applies on anything that you subscribe to and not anything else. So we have to work with the collections. It's not always all article types, and a combination of all that. So that's an area where I think it would be great to work on standardization. I know that the Norwegian consortium unit has initiated some kind of activity to try to move in a standardized direction with agreements. Of course, have ESAC, but that data is not structured in a way that we can actually use it. So that would be fantastic to have a sort of a more community collaboration around.
Right. Well, we've already run out of time, so it's now 10 o'clock, and so I think we need to wrap up. Well, thank you so much, Shelley and Martin. Thank you for participating, and thank you everybody for joining us today. That was a lot of fun and informative. We hope everybody stays healthy and well. We hope to see you at our next event. Keep your eye on your inbox so that you can get the survey and complete that survey for us. Again, thank you to all, and have a great weekend, and goodbye.